Kelly, what was going on in your life when you decided to live in California? You left, was it Texas?
Mm-hmm. Yep, I grew up in the Panhandle of Texas, and I had, just turned 18. I had graduated high school, and USC had accepted me to their theater program. So I was this young girl with big hair and big ideas moving out from West Texas to go to the big city. And, I had grown up doing speech and theater in high school, and I knew that in some capacity I wanted to be in the entertainment industry. So when USC started to recruit me my sophomore year of high school, I was about 15. I saw that as my opportunity. I applied to a bunch of other schools, but USC was the one that I wanted to go to, and I knew it. There was no way that my mom could have afforded my education there, so I made sure that I worked really hard in school, and I graduated at the top of my class, and I got grants and scholarships, and they covered most of my tuition for the 4 years that I was there. I did have to work. I worked a 40-hour-a-week job when I was at USC, but that's how I got my start. I moved out here with less than $1,300 in my pocket and just a bunch of hopes and dreams, and years and years later, some of them are starting to come true.
And I'm sorry, you drove out here?
I drove out here.
How long did it take?
It took a couple of days. I remember having all of these CDs from the late 90s, Alanis Morissette and that kind of stuff blasting. I was a big Tori Amos fan, but that's sort of that was my road trip in music. But yeah, and I was the only person in my dorm with a car, so I made a lot of friends my freshman year.
What were you thinking about on that 2-day road trip? Of course, you were obeying the speed laws, I'm sure.
Sure, 18. Yeah, absolutely. No, I was thinking, I should have been really scared, but I was so excited. I was just so excited because I knew I was leaving this part of my life behind, and I knew. I don't think that there are many people that can be so certain about what they want to do with their lives. And that's what's kept me in this industry for as long as I have, because I've known for so long that this is what I wanted. I'm not as successful as I'd want to be right now, but I know that one day, if I keep working, it will happen. So I was thinking on that drive out there that, this is the start. This is the start of my life.
And what was the first destination? You actually drove to the USC campus?
No, actually, I stayed with a friend of mine in the Santa Barbara area at first, because I left before school started. I literally could not wait to get out to California. So I stayed with a friend on the West Coast for a bit, and for a good 5-6 weeks before school started, I had the first summer of freedom that I think I'd ever had in my life. I was 18. And I was just, able to go up and down the coast. I did have to go to campus a couple times. On one occasion, I was trying to figure out something with the financial aid office. And this is mortifying, but I didn't know how to parallel park a car.
Oh.
You don't need to do that in West Texas. So I was on the campus, and I was trying to park my lovely POS car. And this officer knocked on my window. And I rolled it down, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm in trouble. And he's like, do you want me to just do that for you?
Oh, wow.
So
okay.
I was like, okay. So he parked my car for me. It was very nice of him.
Very nice. Wow.
Clearly I needed the help.
I'm sorry, forgive me, how does USC recruit people? Were you already applying to the program, or how does that work?
No, what had happened is I was doing speech and theater competitions. So Texas is like a 4A, 5A school. It's just the way the districts are broken up. So you do these competitions in speech and theater. You can do prose and poetry, you can do dramatic interpretation. It's actually called the NFL, it's the National Forensics Leagues is part of who it's hosted by. And I remember when we were all competing in high school, we were told, Brad Pitt was in the NFL, so this was, was a big thing for us. And I remember my senior year, I went to nationals, and Josh Gad had made it into the finals. And of course, we all watched him, and it was amazing. And then, years later, he's Josh Gad. But that was my first introduction to him. So a lot of people who got their start, especially on the acting side of things, that's how they got into it. So, but the recruiters from USC, they all of the colleges kind of follow the people that track in the tournaments, and that's how my my start happened.
And then once you were up and running, you had your job, you were going to classes. How are you acclimating to the difference of Texas? Forgive me, I've only been through on via the airport, but I realize it's a different. There's Southern charm, there's manners, there's things that maybe LA doesn't have, and maybe on the opposite. How are you acclimating to that?
It was very funny. I grew up actually a left-handed vegetarian Democrat, so I kind of acclimated very quickly to the California climate. I'm no longer a vegetarian, but I fit in pretty quickly. Certainly dealing with the culture shock. When you're 18, I think it's better to do something like that when you're younger. I think you're more open to taking risks than you would be, say, if you were older. Like, I'm very glad that I made the move to go when I did, when I was 18, because had I been, in my late 20s or my 30s and established somewhere else, I might have been too afraid to let go and try something new.
So you were raised in Texas. Are there any Texan sayings that you kind of live your life by? I know that it seems like there's a lot of everything's bigger in Texas. They have just different interesting sayings.
I think one of the funniest ones that you can get away with saying, and I think that the joke's kind of out on this one, is "bless your heart." That's just something that you say when you're being polite, but really it's casting a lot of shade at somebody. I think another funny saying from the South is jumpier than a fart in a griddle. Oh, and that means that you're nervous. So I've used that on occasion, and people have looked at me like, what are you talking about? But no, I find, there's one of the screenplays that I wrote, the one that actually launched my career with my agents and my manager, and won the UCLA screenwriting competition. It's inspired by my grandmother, and it's called The Baltimore School of Charm. It's about a woman in the 1950s who murders her abusive husband and goes on the run by pretending to be an East Coast debutante. And she hides out, and she pretends to affect these manners from the Emily Post's book Etiquette. So that's how she disguises herself. So for me, growing up with that sort of grace and charm was something that my grandmother instilled in me from a very young age. My grandmother didn't murder my grandfather, but she did get out of a really bad situation, and she went off and did her own thing, and she came back years later. I mean, this is a woman who hadn't graduated high school. She wasn't formally educated, but somehow she started coaching women through the Miss Texas pageants. And I remember being a child, and she would teach me and my sister how to walk with books on our heads, and how to properly get out of a car, and how to pump gas. And this is you pump gas, you put your doeskin gloves on because you don't want to get your hands dirty. So there was this sort of genteel nature about her that I really wanted to capture in this character, Millie. And they always say, write the thing that you're afraid of, and I was afraid to tell the story because it does deal with a lot of things. It deals with domestic violence and getting out of that situation, and it's not pretty. I mean, she kills her husband in the narrative, but I wanted it to have this underlying element of grace, and the way that I incorporated that was to sort of make the text from Emily Post's book, which is the authority on etiquette, the underlying theme.
I know you've written scripts, you have plays, stage plays you're working on, and you also have 2 children's books. So I'm wondering, did you have a parent or grandparent that would sit you down and read to you, and that's where your love of stories developed?
Yeah, absolutely. I have one children's book that's published right now with Scholastic, so there are more in the works. I was actually emailing with my editor today.
Oh, okay. Oh, well, I thought you had 2. Okay, maybe
I will have 2.
It's in the ether, yeah.
I will. But no, it's funny. My grandmother was sort of the impetus for a lot of the things that I have carried through me with my childhood to an adult. I didn't necessarily have a harmonious environment growing up, so she was this sort of escape for me. And I would spend weekends at her house, and she would always, come up with the most amazing games, and she had books. And I mean, this is pre video games and technology and things like that. So we would play with board games and books, and she would constantly read to me. she would constantly encourage me to write and, act things out. And she actually was the inspiration for my first children's book too. So the book is called Sleepy Toes, and it's for kids. Now, the way that I started to write this and how this came to be is when I turned 30, I was in a place where I was very, very unhappy with my life, and I decided to do something about it. So I created something called a fuck it list, and I hope I can say that.
Yeah, you can. Sure.
Okay, so I created my fuck it list, and that was basically, it was like a bucket list. And yes, there's a script about this too. So, but the fuck it list was the things that I was afraid to do in my life, and I just thought, you know what, I'm 30. I don't have the luxury of letting fear be the deciding factor for what I want to do anymore. So I did things like I took myself to New York, I went on a trip to Asia, I, lost a bunch of weight, and I took my hand at writing a children's book. And it was called Your Feet Are Getting Sleepy. And I had illustrated it myself, and I wrote it, and I self-published it. My background is in marketing and creative direction, so I packaged this whole thing. I did an audio recording. I hired a friend of mine from the Groundlings to narrate it, and I hired a musician to score it. It had like a 6-minute lullaby afterwards, like to play kids to sleep. And I put all these materials together, and I sent it out to every single publisher that I could think to send it to. Anybody that was open to queries. And I got very close with one publisher, but they ultimately passed. So I was like, all right, well, this was a very expensive experiment. And 4 years later, I get a phone call from a woman at Scholastic. And she says, hi, my name is so-and-so. I received your submission all these years ago, and my boss no longer runs this department, I do. And I was calling to see if you would be interested in publishing with us.
Wow.
This is 4 years after I had, self-published and submitted it. So anybody that says self-publishing doesn't lead to, the results at some point, there's not all instances where that's applicable. But this, from the time that I made myself do it and got it out there, it unagented. The very first thing that I send out there gets bought by the world's largest publisher.
4 years later?
4 years later.
Unbelievable.
Unbelievable. And that sort of kickstarted everything else. And this book, Sleepy Toes, that's what it became. But my grandmother used to do this thing with me, to get me to sleep at night. She'd go, your feet are getting sleepy, very, very sleepy. And she'd work her way up, your body until you'd eventually drift off and fall asleep. So this is what I had put together into this book. And my editor saw the value in it. And over 50,000 copies have been sold now. It's done really, really well. And that's, that opened up the door to so many other things. So I think that, it was the heart that went into the story that propelled it forward. So it's one thing to just, write something. I mean, and writing kids' books is hard. It's harder than writing screenplays, believe it or not.
Really?
Yeah. The book is only about 30 pages long. But, from the time that it got acquired to the time that we finished the revisions to the time it got published, that was a 6.5-year stretch. We worked on revisions for the text for this for months. But yeah, so that's.
And someone else did the illustrations? Or
This amazing illustrator named Corey Dorfeld did the illustrations. Typically, if you're, and this is advice because I get asked this all the time as a children's book author, do you send illustrations? Should you pay someone to illustrate your stuff for you? No, the answer is no. If you are not inherently an illustrator author, don't pay for someone to do it. And don't try to do it yourself, because when your publisher actually does take your book, they will match you with somebody. So they're the ones that take care of that. But if you are an illustrator author, which is that's a hot commodity. So if you have that talent, then by all means market that out, but not if you're just a writer.
And so the second book that you're working on, at what stage is that in right now?
There's a couple.
Oh, there's a couple. Okay.
There's a couple. So there's a lot of them that are just in logline format. There's some that have been, drafted out into the first iterations. They're in all various phases. It would be unfair for me to pinpoint something right now, but definitely one thing that I always try to do for myself is when I get an idea, I write it down. Like even if it's a silly idea, write it down because you never know when you're going to need to come back to it. And that's kind of where I found myself at right now. So.
And where do you keep these ideas? Are they like in a little book or a computer?
So I typically put them in a Google sheet. So I will write everything in a Google sheet so it's accessible no matter where I'm at. This is another thing that I always make sure that I have all of my ideas, pitches, log lines. They need to be accessible at any point in time, because if you never know when you're going to be asked to pitch. I was attending an event. My other project, DARUMA, has been, we've started partnering with organizations like the Reeve Foundation and Respectability and the Rudderman Foundation. They've taken notice because this features 2 disabled lead actors, but the movie's not about their disability. We were invited to attend a roundtable event just to be there, just as special guests. But this was an event that the Respectability people had put on to help their people with actual disabilities in the industry to try to get work and learn what to do. And I'm sitting there in the lobby, and I'm waiting for this event to start, and this gentleman comes up to me and he starts talking. I had no idea that it was the featured speaker. So he starts asking me, what are you doing here? Why are you here? And I told him about our project, and he was like, let me see. And had I not had it on me, I would have missed an opportunity. So always be prepared to have your ideas accessible.
And also too, you never know, like always be open to, I know in LA it's easy to get closed off because we don't know what the person's agenda is, but you just never know what someone could actually, might be harmless, and that sounds like it led to something great.
Yeah, and I mean, it's not to say, have every interaction and looking at what can that person do for me, but certainly be open and respectful to talking to people. It's very hard if you're shy, and I mean, I'm not inherently an outgoing person. That's something that I've had to work on. When you're meeting with different development execs, one of the things that they ask you to do is, to tell me about yourself. That's a huge question that gets asked all the time. What they're doing is they're trying to figure out, is this somebody that we can put in a room with the director? Can I put my producers with them? Can this person be socially competent in that environment, or am I going to regret this hiring decision? So this is the first phase of your interview. And I learned this from when I was acting as well. Your audition doesn't start when you get in the room. Your audition starts the minute you get out of the car, because you don't know who you're talking to. You don't know if you bump into somebody, you don't know the receptionist, 15 years later, whatever, maybe they turn into something. And if you have a negative interaction, it's going to stick with somebody. So positive interactions can be neutral, but negative interactions, you will have a very hard time recovering from that.
Sure. And when they ask you, tell me about yourself, how much time is appropriate? Some people could go on forever, others be very quick.
I think it's really about reading the room. My first general lasted about 45 minutes, which is pretty good. When you read the room, if you're in there for 25 minutes or under, you didn't necessarily have the best meeting, because they're eager to get on to the next thing. So if your meetings go for an hour or more, you've had a good interaction. I mean, obviously be respectful of their time. I met with an executive once who, an hour into our meeting, her assistant knocked on the door and said, "Your coffee's ready." And I was like, okay. And it turns out that was code. That was a code that the exec had set up with her assistant to make sure that the meeting was going well. Her response then dictated the next action. So if they were trying to get me out of the room or something like that, then the assistant would have known to been like, oh, well, your call is on line 2, and they would have canned the meeting. So there's these subtle things that you may not inherently know that you need to look out for, but you've got to be able to control your own nerves. Come in with a couple stories, come in with a couple of anecdotes if that helps you feel better and just be more personable in a room.
So you drove out here from Texas to attend USC for theater, dramatic arts, but now you've focused a lot on writing.
Yeah.
Where did that shift come in?
I mean, it's hard to make it as an actor out here. It's really hard. And I knew that I wanted to write, I just didn't know how to tell the stories. And I think that this is something that's inherently different in men and women, and this could be just me, but women, when they don't know how to do something, I find that they tend to try to educate themselves first before they take the leap and do it. And that may be a good thing, that may be a bad thing. I don't know, but that's my particular process. I find that a lot of men are able to just fake it till you make it and just wing it. I always get what's called imposter syndrome. So for me, I had, obviously, at that point had failed with the children's book. When I first started writing the Baltimore School of Charm, which is what launched my screenwriting career, I hadn't been published yet. That came literally 6 weeks after I'd started the UCLA Extension Writers Program. So I was in a class with this professor, adjunct professor, Justin Trevor Winters. Yes. He's fantastic. Yes. Really great guy. We're still friends, but he taught me my first screenwriting class. So as an actor, I knew how to break a script down. I knew what the beats were, but I never looked at it from the writing standpoint. And I decided this was something that I really wanted to try my hand at. I had a bunch of stories that I had wanted to tell, and I didn't quite know how to tell them. So I did what I always do. I started to educate myself on how to do that. So when I got into Justin's class at UCLA, and again, this is the extension program.
Great program.
Oh, it's fantastic. I mean, again, this is I can fully credit my education there and the experience of winning their screenwriting program to propelling me to where I am today. Absolutely, their instructors are top notch. But I was in Justin's class, and we're developing the scripts that we want to start working on. And I had two stories that I'd really wanted to tell. One of them was the Baltimore School of Charm, and the other one is a feature called DARUMA, which we will be crowdfunding for in October. We've got it cast, we've got the support of a bunch of organizations, and we have Alex Yellen, the director, attached. But I ultimately decided to start telling the story of the Baltimore School of Charm. And what's interesting about this story is that it happened, I started to tell it before the Me Too movement really took off. It deals with, domestic violence, and, it has a very strong female lead. It's set in the 50s. It's inspired by my grandmother's struggle. But this became a very personal story. And when Justin was, teaching me, and coaching me through, what script to pick, he told me, pick the script that you want to get in bed with for the longest, because you're going to be wrestling with it for a long time. So, and I find that my first screenplay was the Baltimore School of Charm, and that was the hardest one, because I didn't quite know how all the pieces fit together. So I worked on that script for about 3 years before it finally got to its final state, and the one where it won the competition. And that happened right around when the Me Too movement was happening. So it coincided very nicely with the current climate.
How long, I'm sorry, did it take you to write the script?
3 years.
3 years? And so was the first draft was how long?
I think it was probably about 110 pages. Its final state is probably, I think, 97 or 98 pages now. So.
Was it one of these things where you were able to just get it all down in a messy form and then work on it, or did it take some time?
It took some time. Difficult? It took a lot of time. This is where you start working. For me, my process was figuring out the beats and the characters, and I know a lot of people don't put a lot of stock into the competitions, but I do think that as a new screenwriter, or someone who's finding your way and finding your process, if you can afford to enter them, it's invaluable, because what will happen is you will get reader feedback on some of them, and you can start tracking your progress. So for me, I did my first draft, and I believe it was a semifinalist in the Screencraft Fellowship. And then from there, I was like, okay, well, it's not terrible. It's okay. So I started to work on it more, and I tweaked it, and I would enter it in different competitions. And it became, a second rounder at Austin Film Festival. It became a top 15% Nichols finalist. So all of these different iterations, and I would take the feedback and I would incorporate it into the script. That's not to say that I would change my vision or my storyline or the characters, but the readers really do take a lot of time to put in good, valuable notes, especially in those top competitions like AFF, Nichols, and Screencraft too. But I took the notes and I would incorporate it. And, you know, it's very easy to get discouraged and disagree with somebody when they try to give you notes. And that, I think, stunts you as a writer. You have to be open. You have to know when to not compromise your vision, but you also have to know when to be open to taking feedback. So I allowed myself to do that process and, you know, fail for 3 years with this one story. I was kind of, you know, mucking about with other ideas too, but eventually, you know, I got notification that Baltimore was one of the top 3 finalists for the UCLA screenwriting competition in the fall of 2018. No, I'm sorry, in the fall of 2017. Fall of 2017. And I was absolutely stunned. And then the announcement went out that it won. And from there, I had been chatting with a friend of mine about another project I was working on, and my phone literally started to blow up because I'm not kidding. The news that I had won the contest had been released by UCLA, and they sent it out to production companies, they sent it out to agencies, they sent it out to development execs, and that news had gone out while I was chatting with my friend who happens to now be my manager. I didn't know he was managing clients at the time because he was a producer. But I'm starting to get all of these emails from, you know, William Morris and CAA, and they're like, congratulations, we'd love to chat with you. And I'm like, oh my God, wow. What do I do? And he's like, what is this? What happened? And I told him, and he goes, we need to meet. We need to talk. So we did, and I signed with him, and he helped me to organize those meetings and, you know, make sure that I spoke with the right people, and that got me signed with my reps today.
So you talked about something you called a general. What is that?
So a general is a meeting that happens between you and a development executive. It's a very informal meeting, and it's very easy to get worked up about on your first one if you've never done it before, because you feel like you're being judged, and you are to a certain extent, but you should take it as a very easy, informal first date. You're meeting with a production company, you're meeting with a development exec, they've read something, you know, your reps, or somehow they've gotten some material that you've written that they like. They've read it, they want to meet with you. So this is a vetting process for them to see, you know, are you good in a room? Are you a little odd? Maybe they don't want to hire you. This is just a way to make sure that, you know, if they go to bat for you, that they're not going to end up losing their job. So, but you know, it's a meeting between you and the executive. You should always come in with a couple of ideas. You know, they'll have read either a spec, you know, feature film or a spec pilot, and they'll have liked it. Go in. Always take the water, because they'll offer you water.
That's a good tip.
Always take the water, because your mouth will get dry. But yeah, it's a very informal meeting, and you know, it's easy to say don't put the pressure on yourself if you've never done one. I didn't bomb my first one, but I got better as I progressed.
Do you think you have to be empathic or open to be a good writer?
I mean, isn't that the job of being a writer? Is to tell, you know, the story of humans. I mean, you can certainly write a blockbuster movie. I mean, I know that there are a lot of big studio platforms out there that just, you know, tell, and I'm not going to name any particular films, but there are some that just don't have character. They're all action and maybe storylines. But yeah, I think in order to tell stories that people gravitate to, you have to be willing to tell, you know, a little bit of yourself in each one. One thing that people always ask you when you are writing is, why are you the person to tell this story? Why should you be the voice of this? And it's easier to, I don't want to say prove, but it's easier to persuade people that you are the right person to tell a particular story if you yourself can relate to it. I think that's what we're all looking for. You know, anytime that we go to a movie, we're looking to experience a kind of catharsis. You know, we're looking to experience some kind of human emotion. I find that my best pieces, my best work, are the ones that I've really put myself into, and they have a bit of me in. Like the Baltimore School of Charm. There's a reason that story is so impactful, and there's a reason that it resonates with people. It's because it's inspired by my family. It's something that, you know, I've lived through. It's something that other women have lived through. It's a bit of me on that page. Absolutely, you need to be empathetic.
Sure, and at the same time, being empathetic and open also has its drawbacks in that maybe things wound you more, or it's more intense for you. So how are you able to be open and sensitive to things that are coming at you for story ideas, but then also be able to receive notes? And sometimes they're not always going to be positive, or go into a room and maybe you read that room and it's not friendly.
Because I think that that's learning the writing process. You can learn, you know, it's like, let's imagine we were building a building. You've got to have some kind of a floor plan to do it, right? You've got to know the rules before you can break them. So if you can learn structural engineering and how to put it together, then you can shape it into whatever shape you want it to be. You know, you can make a skyscraper with, you know, turrets on it if you wanted to. But that's how you find your voice. That's how you start making stories your own. Learn the rules before you break them. So, you know, you can't tell such an emotionally overdrawn story, you know, where you've got your lead crying or being assaulted or abused for, you know, 2.5 hours. Nobody's going to want to see that. I think that you as a writer need to understand that you have a duty to your audience to make sure you tell a story that moves forward and that you tell a story that progresses. Don't skimp on character. Certainly save those moments, you know, of great emotion, but learn how to construct your story first. You're serving a lot of masters when you're writing, and if you don't have good structure, I mean, unfortunately, your story will fall apart.
How does someone become good as a writer? You said at first you weren't sure you could do it, but you wanted to definitely learn, have that as a safeguard. You didn't want to just try it and say you were a writer without doing it.
You know, I still have problems saying I'm a writer. I don't know, when do you ever become good? I mean, if you're Maya Angelou or somebody like that, then you're definitely a good writer. But I don't know. I think asking yourself the question, always wanting to be better, always knowing that you can dig deeper, and always finding that you can do something better, that will help you lead to improving your process. And I want to stay away from using labels like good or great, because that kind of puts, you know, that puts a lot of pressure on yourself, especially for somebody that's just starting out. You have to be okay with failing. You only need one story to spark the next thing in your career. I failed for 3 years with Baltimore. And then when I finally got it right, it struck the right chord.
What do you think the difference was? Just working on it? Just honing it?
I think it was my dogged perseverance of not giving up on it. I wanted people to see what I saw. And I had to find a way to communicate that out. And I think just writing draft after draft after draft after draft. And I've probably gone through 30 iterations of that script. You know, with time, I've certainly gotten better. I've improved my own process so I can shorten that writing cycle. But the first one, I had no idea what I was doing.
What were some of the notes that you got, and how much of the feedback did you incorporate to change?
I mean, I incorporated feedback from a variety of sources. I incorporated it from some of the competitions that I was in, some of the instructors at UCLA. Character was one of the things that people would really hone in on. I mean, obviously there are things like, well, this is a bit of a plot hole. You may want to look at this, but those are the obvious things. But people would always talk about making the character more in depth. Like what little things can you do to make a character stick out in someone's mind? There's a second female lead in Baltimore. It's a young girl named Shasta. She's 17, and so there's a relationship between Millie, the lead, and Shasta. So Millie is trying to outrun the law, and she gets stuck in a small town where, you know, she can't get out of it, and she ends up helping Shasta, the young girl there. But Shasta has a stutter. So that was one thing that I was able to develop with Shasta. Initially, she didn't have a stutter. But I gave her that impediment to help show her relationship with the world around her. So I think that there are certain traits, there are certain mannerisms, there are certain things that you can do to, just build up your character and obviously give them a backstory, but that will inform the decisions on how they interact with the world.
Did you miss the two characters when you were finished writing? Was it hard for you to give them up?
I tell you what's going to be hard for me is when it gets made. You know, as a writer, you typically don't have any control over something when it leaves your hands. So I hope that the company that ends up buying Baltimore School of Charm, I hope that they do those characters justice, because it's not a movie of the week. You know, it's certainly not a melodrama. It's a very strong, powerful piece, and it's my hope that a female director will end up helming it. I think that that's important to actually authentically tell the story. They're like, your characters are like your children. When you send them out into the world, you hope that they're received well and that they do well.
So the feedback initially was that the character, at least the main one, wasn't as fleshed out, and so you really worked on making her just more three-dimensional?
More three-dimensional, yeah.
And so when you finally, you won, it was the UCLA screenwriting competition? Mm-hmm. Okay.
Their extension,
okay. And so these different agencies just found your email, obviously?
No, what happened is when there are different categories within the competition. So it's best feature, it's best spec pilot, and then best pilot. So, and then you're ranked 1, 2, and 3. So there's a total of 9 awards that they've given out. And then there's, obviously first place, second place, third place. So when they send the announcement out, and they've got a list of, thousands of executives and agents that, they've spent years cultivating relationships with. When the announcement goes out, they put out an ad in Variety announcing it. And then they also do a mass email to all of these executives. Oh. So that's how they got tipped off. And, you put first place feature on a competition like that, and it's going to spark some interest. And fortunately it did. And fortunately it got me, the reps that I have today.
So then part of having a rep is they're submitting you to work on shows. How does this work?
So typically what happens, and there's an issue right now with the WGA and the ATA, so I'm not going to go into that in this particular interview, because there are many people that are much more positioned, or much better positioned to speak on that than I am. But typically what happens is, if you've got a spec pilot or a spec feature, they will take that material and they will send it out to different development execs and studios and, see if it's a match. And they could, you can write on assignment. So let's just say if you meet with a development exec and they like your writing, I'm like, well, I've got this project. Would you be interested in taking a crack at it? So that's the job of an agent, is to find their client's work.
And so how much advance notice do you get when you have a meeting?
I have one this week that has been on my calendar for 6 weeks.
Oh, that's good. So you have your outfit, everything's ready, yeah.
Well, yeah. Otherwise, I had one a couple weeks ago. I had a general a couple weeks ago, and she said she actually had an intern, and she asked if it was okay if the intern sat in on the meeting. And I was like, it's totally fine. I mean, it wasn't going to throw me off my game. But we talked about it later. She was like, I think you set the bar a little too high for generals, because she said, we've had some interesting people come in here. She said, yeah, one of the worst pieces of advice that I've ever heard writers being given is to dress like your genre. And I was like, what does that mean? She was like, I don't know. But I was like, what are you supposed to do? I guess if you write action adventure, you're supposed to dress, I don't know. But don't do that. That's bad advice. Um,
So just wear something like, you know,
Yeah.
business casual or.
I mean, don't dress like a schlub, you know,
Right.
make sure that you look professional and neat, clothes that you're comfortable in. I mean,
Sure.
you're not, you're not trying to over impress, you know, you're just be yourself. Just look neat and professional, just be yourself.
Then how long did it take for you to develop sort of like the pitch that is you? Because they want to ask you this, and sometimes people are comfortable, and sometimes. So tell me about yourself. How long did that take?
It changes every time I go into a room. You have to learn how to read your audience, because you may be dealing with somebody who is more closed off, and maybe they don't want to know so much personal information about yourself. I think instead of developing your pitch, you really need to know your story, because you can't tell your pitch the same way every single time, because then it sounds canned. It sounds like you're reading it off of an index card, and nobody wants to be, you know, read a PowerPoint slide. You need to be in a position to authentically tell your story at any given, you know, notice.
How does someone know which story they should write?
You should write the one you're afraid to tell. If it scares you, then you know you need to do it. I have a couple like that right now that I'm working on. I have a play that is going to be going up off Broadway next year. It was actually one of the very first pieces of writing I'd ever done. I was in a group called the Los Angeles Writers Center for years, when I was kind of dipping my toe into writing, and decided I wasn't very good at it. But I had written a play. It's a 2-act play, and I wrote it in 2007. And it's actually scary how applicable it is to today's current climate. It's about a Mexican-American soldier who's injured in Iraq, and his illegal brother is killed while they're serving over there. So this was right after 9/11. And he comes back to Los Angeles, and he discovers that his 2 younger siblings have been put into foster care, and his parents have been deported. And I wrote this in 2007.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and it's called Borderline, and it was actually a semifinalist at AFF last year. Again, as soon as I started to build up my own confidence in my writing, I took off some stuff and I dusted them off, and I started to submit them out. And I have a friend of mine who I went to USC with, who runs a theater up in Manhattan, and this is a issue that she's very passionate about. And I'd never connected the dots before, but I sent it to her, and she said, I said, do you want to read this? And she said, yeah, absolutely. So she read it, and she goes, why don't we do a reading? So we did a reading in April this year in New York, and we have decided to workshop it with the intent of putting it up in the fall of 2020. Now, I have not done any of the rewrites yet, because I am silently criticizing myself, because how do I take the enormity of everything that's going on right now and put it into a 2-act play? And again, you know, why am I the person to tell this story? And this is something that I wrestled with. And I hope it comes out well. I hope I tell an authentic story. And I hope I create something that really resonates and moves people. But my job as a writer is to really take myself, in this particular instance, is to take myself out of it and to put my fears behind me, so I can draft this piece. We need writers right now more than ever, because a lot of people's voices are being quieted, and this is not the time.
Does it scare you?
Of course it scares me. Of course it scares me.
To tell that story?
Yeah, absolutely.
Why does it scare you to tell that story?
You know, I certainly don't want anything to ring inauthentic or hollow. And of course, you know, if I'm telling a story that doesn't necessarily relate to, you know, my own upbringing, you know, my family is not immigrants. I mean, they are from Italy, but that was, you know, two generations ago. So I wasn't directly impacted by that growing up. But there are a lot of people that are hurting right now. There are a lot of people that are struggling. So for me to have to, you know, that's a lot of weight to carry on my shoulders. But I put that weight upon myself, because I feel like this is a very important story to tell, and it's one that I want to tell. So I'm doing a lot of research right now. I'm speaking with immigration attorneys. I am reading, you know, news articles. I'm doing a ton of research. It's my job to tell the story the best that I can. I mean, I'm crafting the story as well. But I find, you know, this other piece that I've worked on, DARUMA, This particular story, it stars 2 disabled leads, but the movie is not about their disability. And I wrote this as a way to deal with my own grief after a member of my family became paralyzed in an accident. Now, the story is not about them. It's not about them at all, but it's inspired by them. And I went through dozens of drafts of that script because I wanted to tell an authentic story. Now, I'm not a disabled person. The last thing I wanted to do was to put anything on the page that was, inauthentic, offensive. I put that script through so many sensitivity reads, which is an important thing to do as a writer. And that's not to say shy away from telling, racy material or things, that are taboo. Definitely tell those stories. But it's important in this level of heightened awareness to put your things through a sensitivity read. And I changed things about that script. I took things out. One thing that I kicked myself for, one of our leads, John, in the script, his character is Robert, but Robert is a double arm amputee. And I wrote Robert how I thought a double arm amputee would be. Very limited action, very limited movement. And then we cast John Lawson. And my God, that guy, he is a private pilot. He can scuba dive. He's an amazing photographer. As a writer, when I initially did, I limited him. And it took me meeting John and interacting and really ingratiating myself with that community to open myself up. And that's how you tell an authentic story. So,
what is the sensitivity read?
So a sensitivity read is to put your material in front of, a person that you are writing about. So let's just say that you're writing about a disabled person, or maybe you're writing about somebody who has HIV, or maybe you're writing about an immigrant. Maybe you're writing about somebody with topical issues, anything that can be considered emotionally or politically charged. So dealing with issues of race, color, economic class, anything that can be possibly disparaging to a particular group of people. It's important that you share those materials. You put it in front of readers, and do a table read. Have actors read the parts back to you. And there was in my play Borderline, one of the pieces of feedback that I'm working into, I have sort of a Greek chorus of Dia de los Muertos characters. And of course that's something that's very traditionally, Mexican. They're, in my story, they function as a Greek chorus, and they're kind of ominous figures. But I had a Latino cast, and, 2 out of 3 of them were like, you really need to be a little bit more positive with these guys, because, the Dia de los Muertos is a way to honor family and tradition. And these guys kind of come across as baddies. And I'm like, okay, I didn't know that. So as a writer, you need to be open to hearing those kinds of suggestions, because, everybody knows the stories, cowboys and Indians, what a classically machismo, imperialistic way of thinking. And nobody would make that movie these days. It wouldn't happen. You go back and you look at a lot of movies from your childhood or the 90s, or a lot of these raunchy comedies, they're creepy. If you look at a lot of movies now, like especially in the 80s, like that's rape culture, and that perpetuates things. People consume the media that you write. It's important to have people look at your materials to make sure it kind of passes a smell test. Now, that's a sensitivity read.
Interesting. And what about the criticism that somebody who hasn't been through something shouldn't be allowed to tell it? I feel like in this climate, because somebody's voice may be censored or they may be afraid to tell that story, that somebody else who may feel like, I don't know, society might view them as they have more freedoms to tell a story.
Yeah.
Should be able to then get that story out there.
I have two things to say about that. The director of my play, the stage reading that we did, she's Latinx. amazing young auteur. We had a conversation, we were getting ready for pre-production, and she asked me, she said, are you of Hispanic descent? I said, no, I'm not. She goes, well, your Spanish is pretty good. And I was like, well, I worked with a translator to get that going. And she asked me, she goes, why are you the one to tell the story? She's like, you're a white woman. Why are you the one to tell this story? And my answer was that no one else is telling it. No one else is telling the story. And, regardless of my background or my skin color or anything, I live in this world and these are issues that I care about. So if I care about them enough to try to talk about them and to try to push them out into the world, my story may not be the end all be all, end of the subject matter. That's not going to be the case. But this is something that I care deeply about. And I live in this world. I'm impacted by these issues too. So that's one way that I address those particular questions. I had a general a couple weeks ago with another production company, a very well-known film company. And, as a writer, you're always constantly going through, at least I am personally, self-doubt and kind of self-loathing and thinking that you suck. But she was talking about a lot of the pieces that I write. And she noticed a common thread, the development exec that I was sitting with. She was like, you tend to really give characters that don't have a voice. And I started to look back at the pieces that I would write or that I'd been working on. And, when you look at Borderline, that deals with the immigration issues, and DARUMA, which deals with disability. And I have another one where the lead is a little deaf girl. And then you deal with domestic violence issues in Baltimore. And I didn't really realize that. And even though, I didn't necessarily have the best upbringing, and I've certainly struggled, she said it very eloquently. She goes, you're using your privilege to give voice to those who don't have voice. So that's something, I actually walked out of that office a little teary, but that really rang true to me.
What makes a great story?
Wow, that's a loaded question. Character. I think that you can forgive a lot of things if you have a character that's interesting to watch on the screen or the stage.
What ruins a story for you? Like, what takes you out of it?
If I'm reading a story, if I'm just looking at something on the page, lazy writing. Like, if somebody has so many typos and plot holes, I once had to, I didn't have to, I offered to read a script from somebody just to give my notes and my feedback. And within 10 pages, I was just angry because it had so many typos, it had so many errors, there was just grammatical mistakes. There was no consideration for time and location, and there was just, why was I reading that? Like, it was a clear indication to me that the writer did not respect my time, because they did not do their due diligence. They did not, what they handed me was not their best effort. So that took me completely out of the story. I can forgive a couple of typos every now and again. I make them myself. I submitted something that I found a typo on like 10 minutes later, and I was kicking myself. But I knew that I'd combed through that document enough times to make sure that there wasn't, a lot of glaring mistakes. But for somebody to be just so blatantly blasé with, punctuation and grammar and basic elements like time and space, I won't work with them.
Can you give me an example of what a plot hole is?
Yeah, so this particular story that I was referencing, they were discussing a geographical location, set in the Southwest, and then all of a suddenly, in the time frame of the story, 3 hours later, they somehow ended up 2,000 miles away, and in a totally different location, and there was no consideration as to how the characters got there. It was just, what? Like, how did you suddenly end up there? It was a massive plot hole.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah,
okay.
It's like, okay, took me completely out of the story.
So in other words, how somebody's getting from point A to point B, there's no consideration in the story for that.
You don't have to spoon feed your audience everything, but if the audience will sit within the rules that you establish. So it's very important to establish the rules of your universe. This goes for people that write sci-fi. This goes for people that write, magical, stories like, the world of Harry Potter or something like that. The rules of the magic are very clearly defined. Once you start to break the rules that you set up, or you start to give too many exceptions, your whole world falls apart.
So aside from being scared to write something, how do you know your protagonist is someone that you want to write about? You want to spend like years working with?
This has happened to me on a couple of occasions, but eventually my characters start speaking to me. They have gotten so vocal that they actually start talking with their own voices. And to me, that's almost like a state of reaching like a runner's high. It's rarely achieved when I've done it. I've done it in about 4 of my scripts. But those to me are the characters that have the strongest voices, and certainly have been the pieces and the projects that have been put out into the world and have gotten me, where I am and the attention that I've gotten. That's key to me, is when those voices are so clear. It's like when I'm writing dialogue, I don't even have to think about what the response would be. The character just automatically says it to me. It's a weird phenomenon, but it does happen.
Have you ever had it where the characters aren't speaking to you, and then you're like, I don't think this is going to work?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, part of being a good writer is knowing when to walk away from something. I had a book that I wrote that was 42,000 words long. It was the first book that I'd ever written, and I was shopping it around. And I found myself going to edit it and trying to figure out what to do with it, and like why it wasn't working, why it wasn't resonating with people. And then I realized myself, I'm 10 pages into it and I'm bored. The character just had no voice. So I realized that was a problem. And it's important to recognize those things in your writing. You have to certainly be aware of what's working, but you also have to be self-aware enough to accept what's not working.
Do you think you were scared to give the appropriate voice to that character, or it just from the get-go, it just wasn't the right sort of combination?
I think it just wasn't. I was trying to force something. I was trying to force a narrative. And, I'm not saying you shouldn't wait for inspiration to strike, because you may never get inspired. It's important to keep pushing through and keep pushing, and, write every day, even if it's bad. You can always go back and edit. I mean, one of the wonderful sayings, and I forget who says this, but you can't edit a blank page. Edit. So, I mean, obviously edit, but you've got to write. But it's important to understand that there are sometimes it's not working. That's not to say trash the idea. There may be a time, 5 or 10 years later, you'll come back and you're like, oh my God, this is the key that makes that work. This is the piece that makes it fit together. So just because you don't have it at the offset doesn't mean that it's a failure or it's never going to work. Certainly save that work, but just recognize when it's time to maybe move on from something.
Can you take us back to the first character that, in a sense, started talking to you? That, I mean, it was like this real person that was like almost in your ear. What was that like?
So the first character that started to talk to me was for actually the first TV pilot that I wrote. When I got signed by my agents, I didn't have a TV sample. And they were like, well, we need a TV sample to send you out. So I wrote a pilot. And the lead in that show, I'd been mulling this idea for so long. I actually wrote it in about a week. And the lead character in that, like she had just been so real, that when I started to write her out, I mean, she's got a best friend and a daughter and this very complicated relationship with her job and her ex-husband. And she was just so real to me. And the character's name is Maggie. Whenever she would talk, it was just her voice, just coming out. And that in turn just formulated, her viewpoint of the world just formulated my decisions with the characters around her, and everyone in the story just came to life. And it's become my signature piece that my reps send out to get my generals in my meetings.
Took you a week to write it?
Yeah.
And how many pages is it?
This is 59 pages long.
Because it's a TV,
it's an hour TV pilot.
I know you're incredibly busy. You're doing many different things. Where do you find the time to write, and do you write every day?
I try to write every day. Actually, I take the train a lot in Los Angeles, and I will write my ideas. You know, I will work in a note, or you know, my iPhone. I will type on my notes there. I do write every day. For me, I find that mornings are better with coffee. You know, when I'm by myself and things are quiet in the house. That's to me the time that I like to do it. And again, I mean, you can't wait for inspiration to strike, because you may never end up writing something. You have to keep pushing every single day. I tend to like to keep a lot of projects in the air at the same time, whether that's developing a new pilot or developing a new feature. I was chasing the rights to a book. I've got this play that's going up now. The difference between wanting to write and being a writer is writing. You're a writer when you say you are.
First off, what does the word DARUMA mean, and when did you start writing it?
So I actually started to write DARUMA after a member of my own family suffered a spinal cord injury. They had a motorcycle accident and became a T4, 5, and 6 paraplegic. And I wrote this short as a way to process my own grief. I mean, as a writer, that's how I dealt with my feelings. It's devastating. I mean, you know, and disability can affect anybody at any given point in time. I mean, it is a universal thing that everybody deals with. But when I was at USC, I studied Asian art history for one of my general requirement classes. And one of my classes, we studied this painting called Ika, showing his severed arm to Daruma. I didn't know anything about this painting, but it was written in the Muromachi period by a guy named Sesshu Toyo. It shows the Daruma, which is the Bodhidharma, the guy that founded Zen Buddhism. Now, the legend goes is that he meditated in a cave for 9 years and his limbs fell away. He had no need for them anymore. So he was this sort of round object, you know what I mean? He had no arms, no legs, nothing. And the painting depicts this guy named Ika, who is a would-be pupil, a disciple who is so desperate to study with the Daruma. So Ika severs his own arm and he presents it to the Daruma. And he wakes the Daruma from a trance, and the Daruma's like, "You've missed the point of the lessons." And he turns him away. And I was so haunted by this painting because it was so garish and it was just so ugly. But what happened was, when my family member was recovering from their injury, they spent months in rehabilitation. They were roomed with a young man who had lost both of his arms in an electrical accident. And they had both turned 21 and they both had their lives ahead of them. They were both, just starting. And you could see, the indomitable spirit that they had. They were, getting into all kinds of mischief and stuff into the recovery center. And they were still the same people. They had just had these life-changing injuries, but they were the same people. So this is where the idea of Daruma came, because here was one young man who had just lost his arms, and here's another young man who had just lost both of his legs. Wow. So together, the theme of this is, it becomes one person. Now, if you look online, you will see what a Daruma doll is. Now, a Daruma doll is a round doll that is popular in Japanese culture. When you get one, you color in one eye black and you make a wish. When your wish comes true, you color in the other eye. So, the Daruma features as an underlying theme in the story. But the story I wrote a fictionalized version of this relationship that unfolded. So this is a story that follows a very bitter, angry paraplegic named Patrick, who discovers that he's got a 4-year-old daughter from a one-night stand before he got injured. And he takes her for an insurance payout, but he quickly learns that he can't parent. So he has to take her to live across the country with her maternal grandparents. And the only person that can help him make this journey is his double arm amputee. So wow. That's the story of Daruma, and that's something that I've been working on for a number of years now. And we have been connecting with organizations like the Reeve Foundation, the Rudderman Family Foundation, Respectability. We've been working with those organizations to help build a platform to get this story out. One of the things that I think was shocking to me when I, won the contest and I got signed and I got repped, I thought, this is it. My screenwriting career is gonna take off. And that's not necessarily the case. You still have to be your own advocate, and you still have to be prepared to pursue your passion projects, because not everybody's going to see the vision that you have for something. Now, we're fortunate in that we have, the team with DARUMA has, we've partnered with people who have seen the vision. We're authentically casting these roles. We are casting 2 disabled actors to play these lead roles. I don't want to have a situation where we've got an able-bodied actor who can, play a disabled role. That's not what we're setting out to do. So it's an uphill battle to produce this project, but we're doing a crowdfunding October 1st with Seed and Spark, which is an indie filmmaker platform. And I encourage anybody who has a script or they want to shoot a proof of concept and they don't know where to go, look there, look at other projects, look at what other people are doing. It's a great place to connect with other filmmakers too.
Yeah, they have some fantastic campaigns. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you have a website that's already set up for DARUMA?
I do. I do, actually. And I think one of the most interesting things about that website is that we have put content from other sources like Respectability and the Ford Foundation. They all have toolkits for disability inclusion in Hollywood. So as a writer, we had talked about sensitivity reads earlier. These, they're PDFs that you can download from the website. They actually have different tips and steps that you as a writer or a producer or a filmmaker can draw from and put into your own work.
And I think it's great too that you already have your website ready to go. I mean, I saw some of the cast, and your director and his bio, and your bio. So I think that's great. So many people, I know it's not ready yet, and I think it's great because but right now it's August, and so we have a few months, and it's fully fleshed out website. It looks great.
Well, we actually put that website up in almost a year and a half ago now.
Oh, you did?
Oh, yeah, that website's been up for a while.
Oh my goodness.
One of the things that we've learned about this process is that nobody's going to do it for you. You have to be able to, and this is where I put my producer hat on. You have to be able to just draw that line in the sand and be like, okay, this is it, we're going. And I find that when you start to get people to come on board, and one day I'm going to write a book about this. One day this is going to be my book to filmmaking. But do you know the story about Stone Soup? Are you familiar with this?
Shel Silverstein?
No. It's actually it's a old folk tale. There's a man who wanders into a village and he's hungry and nobody will help him, and all of the villagers turn him away. So he's like, all right, well, I have a rock. So he goes to the center of town and he's like, I have a magic rock. This magic rock will make amazing soup for everybody to eat. He's like, well, in order to get started, I just need a little bit of water. So someone's like, all right, I'll buy into this. I'll give you a little bit of water. He's like, okay, well, great. So now that we have this water and this magic rock, we just need a little bit of fire. So the owner's like, oh, I've got some wood, so I'll contribute some wood. And gradually, everybody starts contributing to this pot, and they make this amazing soup. So if you look at the process of making an independent feature, like we're doing with DARUMA, as sort of making a film soup, you start to look at, you bring this to the table, and they're like, oh, well, I can bring this to the table. And you start building a team and a collaboration, and eventually you get to the point where we are, where we did the website, then we did a casting, and we connected with casting directors and agents, and we started to actually cast disabled actors in the lead roles, and that opened up the doors to this other community. And now we're partnering with organizations, and it's one thing on top of another, and it's very easy to get discouraged in this process because it takes a long time. But honestly, these things should take a long time. They should, because they need to be good. They're important. So
that's really interesting. So that you don't want to rush it because it means a lot to you, instead of just putting it out and it's half done, and then there's criticisms and you go, yeah, I know. That's smart.
It's one thing to wait for something to happen, and then it's another to be like, you know what, it's time. It's finding a balance. So we could wait forever and look for the right financiers to come and give us money to make this project. But the fact of the matter is that casting two lead actors that have disabilities, that's not really something people want to take a gamble on. That's not something, a lot of people, as a producer or, a film financier or whatever, would be like, well, who's your lead actor? Because their job is to make money. They've got to pay their bills. They've got to, kids to send to school or whatever. It's not a risk that people are necessarily willing to take, but that doesn't mean that the project shouldn't be made. So it's up to you to find creative ways to make it happen.
And you're also the writer for
I am
DARUMA?
a writer, yeah.
And so you said it's loosely based on a family member. It's not their exact story,
No,
right?
It's not loosely based on them at all.
Oh,
Actually,
it's not? Okay.
No. This family member never discovered that they had a child from a one-night stand. It was written as a way for me to process my own grief. What was very important for me about this particular story, if you look at most narratives where you have a disabled character, the storyline tends to go from being able-bodied to having a tragic accident and then suddenly being disabled and then living your life. Then that's the inspirational part of the story. It was very important for me to tell a story where it had two leads that were disabled, and that wasn't a plot point, that wasn't a device. It's nothing for them to overcome. It just is what it is, because listen, 25% of the American population lives with a disability, yet 2% are represented on screen. So we talked about, using your privilege as a platform for underrepresented voices. This is single-handedly, for me, the most important project that I'm working on right now.
What was the writing process like for DARUMA?
Lonely. It was really lonely. I kept this story in a drawer for years. Again, it was a way for me to process something that had happened that was, very, very personal, and affected me greatly. But, I can't necessarily say, and this may be awful, but like had I never personally experienced what a disability or an injury, was like with a family member, this might not have been a story that I'd ever, told. Again, I'm not disabled myself, but I am the person to tell this story because I want to tell it, and I want to tell it authentically. But the process for writing this was very lonely because I didn't have anyone to share it with. And it sat in a drawer for about, 10 years, and it was awful. It was awful. But
that long? Wow.
Well, I'd started writing it as a short first. And then again, as I'm developing my craft and honing my process, and I took an outline to my class with Justin Trevor Winters, and he looked at that one, and he looked at the Baltimore School of Charm, and he was like, you need to write the Baltimore School of Charm. So I did that, and then as I started to develop that, I wanted to branch out and work on other projects. So I started to work on revisions of DARUMA that were all equally terrible, but I started to enter the script into different screenwriting competitions. And I got feedback and I got notes. And over the course of about 2.5 years, it became its current iteration. And then it found its director, Alex Yellen. I gave it to him to read. And by page 3, he's laughing. And I'm like, what is so funny? Why are you laughing? He's like, this is hilarious. I'm like, it's not supposed to be a comedy. And he's like, but what you've written is really funny. So he read it and he could see what I saw. And he was like, I would really like to direct this. And I was like, okay. So we now have Alex attached to it as a director. And then we cast John and Toby to shoot our proof of concept last fall, just so we could, it's so much easier to visually tell your story. So I encourage you, if you can shoot a proof of concept, to do that, especially if you're trying to produce your own feature. But from there, I had my actors read the script, and I talked about, doing sensitivity reads. And John Lawson, the guy that plays Robert, like I said, I had initially written the character that was very limited, and John can do so much. I mean, you would assume that somebody with, no arms would, not be able to do the things John does, but that was my own naivete. So
with DARUMA, I know you're launching a crowdfunding on Seed and Spark in October of this year, but did you also try to get a production company?
We've talked with a couple people. We've had interest. I mean, we've had a lot of people come to us and say, this is an amazing idea. Like, I love this. Who are you casting as the leads? And then when we say that we're actually authentically casting the disabled, our 2 disabled leads,
enthusiasm fizzles, because again, you've got to look at what translates to box office sales. So it's so much easier to attach a name actor to a script, and I mean, especially something that's got, you know, these challenging characters to play. But I don't want to compromise the vision of this project. Like, the intent of it is to not. The intent is to be a vehicle and a platform for underrepresented voices, and I want it to be the first of its kind. I mean, can you name another movie like this?
Well, I can think of where there's been named actors that have played disabled individuals,
Right.
but not, no.
It's very rare to see.
Except for Dodgeball, sorry. I mean, they did have, well, I mean, people with, I don't know if they were autistic or what, different, you know, but Dodgeball had
right.
people
but the butt of a joke, right?
Yes,
Yeah,
very true.
so disparaging.
Very true.
But, you know, it's very rare to come across something completely new. And this is a story that has never been told before, and especially in the way that we're wanting to tell it. So that in of itself is very unique, and that's not something that I'm willing to compromise on, which is why we're going the hard route and we're doing this ourselves.
What roadblocks have you run into with DARUMA in terms of you've presented it to production companies, other things maybe that we're not aware of?
I mean, I think that's the problem most indie filmmakers running into is financing. So where do you get the money from? Like, how do you put this into reality? We've done 3 different budgets. We've done one at $1 million, we've done at $500,000, and then we've done this bootstrap one that we're going to be crowdfunding for in October. You know, there's challenges with every project. So first of all, like, is your idea good? Can you get it on the page? Can you articulate it? Can you start finding people that believe in your vision? This has been something that we've been working on solidly now for the last 3 years. And we're right now at the point where we feel like we've gotten our platform and our village of people and supporters together. And we're ready to take the next step and attempt to raise the funds for production. But again, you know, this is something that every project runs into is who comes up with the money. So,
what are you learning from these obstacles?
Well, one, I'm learning that nobody is going to do it for you. You have to be able to do it yourself. You have to put yourself in uncomfortable positions and be prepared. You know, if you're not good at pitching, then you need to become good at pitching. You need to learn how to tell your story, and you need to learn how to tell your story succinctly. You know, I'm also learning to celebrate the small victories. Just because, you know, you don't get from A to Z immediately, you can't neglect every step that goes in between. You know, like for us, getting our cast attached, our amazing cast attached, that was a win, that was a celebration. Then getting our film, our proof of concept shot. You know, while we were doing that, the Woolsey fire was going on. Oh. We lost a location. Actually, we lost a couple locations during that because we were going to be shooting up in Agora Hills, and we ended up we called in a couple favors and begged, borrowed, and stole. That's terrible English. That's terrible. We begged, borrowed, and stole, but we ended up getting, you know, some new friends along the way who helped us. But it's very important. And actually, a friend of mine told this to me, a producer, a friend of mine, when I won the contest. It's very important to celebrate the small victories. When I was at USC, I had a professor, amazing on-camera professor named Joe Hacker, and he would coach young actors, you know, how to go about their career. And he loved to tell the story about when he was younger and he was working on Broadway, and he went up to his idol and was like, you know, I want to be where you are. How do I get to be where you are? And the response was, you can't, but there are a million ways. And he always liked to tell us that, you know, every small thing, every small success was one pearl on a very long strand. So you just have to keep threading that needle and finding the courage and the strength to keep going.
Great story. What does it take to get a Hollywood movie made?
I don't know. I haven't made one yet. I imagine it takes quite a bit of luck. So, do you want to make Hollywood movies? I feel like I have some scripts that I've written that are certainly more commercial than the ones that I have, you know, I'm working towards. But I think that as a young screenwriter, you know, starting out, it's very important to establish your voice and your brand. I have a lot of fun projects that I don't spend my time working on or developing because I'm not there yet. And those could be the quote unquote Hollywood movies. I feel like at this point, I'm proving myself and I'm putting my work out there, and I've got to put my best foot forward. And, maybe a Hollywood movie isn't the thing that I want to build my platform on. I'm not looking to make a quick buck, don't get me wrong, being paid for writing is awesome. When I got my first check as a writer, I took a picture of it because it was an incredible feeling. But you have to consider that, you're in it for the long haul. It's very easy, I think, for a lot of people to burn out. And if you can find your voice and your passion and the things that keep your drive going, that will sustain a career.
Does it scare you to write non-Hollywood movies?
No, because I find that that's the thing that I tend to play in the most. Where I'm emotionally at my headspace is at. The thing that scares me is writing, science fiction and things like that, because I feel like maybe I don't have the imagination to come up with the world, of this, maybe a post-apocalyptic or something. Maybe I would be very afraid of doing something cliche. How do you top Star Trek? How do you top Star Wars? And who am I to even try? But again, we go back to the point, great storytelling isn't about these set pieces, it's about the characters. So if you look at most science fiction pieces, they're actually stories about political turmoil or refugees or something like that. So again, go back to character, go back to your story.
Have you ever thought about stopping and said to yourself, there's easier ways to spend my life?
All the time. I've, carved out a career for myself as a marketing and creative professional, copywriting and art directing and things like that. And if I really gave myself to that, maybe I could be very successful, but I feel like there would be this hole inside of me that would just be devoid. I think that maybe I'm not very smart. Maybe I should have given up a long time ago because I keep, putting myself through this and, trying and keep going. But I think that that's part of the challenge that a lot of writers face is this self-doubt and the imposter syndrome, and especially as a woman and trying to break through in this industry. It's very hard. You grapple with that all the time. And writing by nature is a very solitary activity. It's very easy to want to throw in the towel. And that's why it's so important to celebrate those little victories. Just one little thing, one connection, one interview, one, chance encounter could change your world.
But by naming the imposter syndrome and sort of calling it out, does that take away its power a little bit?
You have to be aware of it when it's happening. There are times, and I think that this comes with age and maturity as well. Certainly I'm more grounded now that I am in my 30s than I was in my 20s. I'm able to own my mistakes more readily. I'm able to objectively look at myself and, separate the need of me or the part of me that needs approval to the part of me that is trying to create something as well. So that if I can give myself enough space to fail, then I can help overcome that imposter syndrome. But it's not an easy thing to do, and I know a lot of people grapple with it.
But when you're in that space of writing about just some character that it's so real, it's speaking to you, it's kind of scary, it might be a little edgy, that sounds like it's not being an imposter by any means.
That's such a rare state of enlightenment that, like I said, it's almost like getting a runner's high. It doesn't happen all the time, but it is magic when it does.
What's the hardest part of writing a screenplay for you?
Getting to the end of it. It's so easy sometimes to just give up and say that it's, you can't finish it. So I always try to start with an outline. I always outline my work first. And I know a lot of people don't work this way, but I find that if my outline falls apart, then my screenplay falls apart. So when I was first starting off, of course, I didn't necessarily put the time into developing the outlines or the character beats or doing all of this, back writing. But that's actually where the writing starts to happen, is when you can, the pilot that I wrote in a week. The reason I was able to do that in a week is because I'd been thinking about it for years. And at that point, I'd learned how to make an outline and I'd learned how to, structure 6 acts within a TV show. So this is my first time putting it into a practical application, but because I knew the steps and I knew what to do, I was able to go ahead and execute it very quickly. That's not necessarily the case for all of the things that I write, but I do find that if you don't have a good outline to start with, then it's very, very, very difficult to tell a compelling story, one that will hold together, and one that will take you on the emotional arc that your character needs to go on.
What's been your hardest year here in Los Angeles, and then what's been your easiest year, and why?
Well, I can say that this year has been my easiest year, and that's partly because I'm in the best place I've ever been emotionally. I'm getting married in a couple weeks.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much. I'm actually marrying the director of DARUMA, Alexander Yellen.
Did this happen before he was cast on? Or
yeah,
after?
actually.
Okay.
So he didn't get the job because he proposed.
Oh, okay, all right.
No.
So say, way to go. That's good.
No. That's one way to get a job in Hollywood. No, we started dating a few years ago, and he's been very supportive of my work. He himself is a director and a cinematographer, so he understands what it's like to be a professional in the business. And he picked up the script to DARUMA and he read it and he really liked it. So that's how he got the job. But this year has been wonderful. I have spent the last 20 years, which is how long I've been out here. This is actually my 20th year of being out here in LA. Okay. It is the culmination and the accumulation of every failure that I've had, every success, every person that I've met. This is all coming together now. So it's funny that after being at this business for so long, I feel like I finally am getting a leg up. So I don't want to say that I've ever had like a worse year. There are certainly years, where I've been, financially strapped and I've had to, take on, extra side gigs to make money and things like that. All the things that people out here go through and deal with. But right now I'm living my best life.
And so you're getting married and crowdfunding and maybe shooting a movie, or no? That's going to be
That'll be 2020.
Okay.
So, but we didn't want to, make things too easy on ourselves by just planning the wedding. So we decided to do the crowdfunding right after.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm assuming you're doing the crowdfunding first and then the wedding.
No, the wedding and then the crowdfunding.
Oh my goodness. So, okay.
Yep.
That's very ambitious.
Well, again, nobody's going to do it for you. So, I can tell you this much. We shot our proof of concept together last year. And if your relationship can withstand making a film together, I think you're set up for success.
I think you're right. I think they say travel together and different things. I think make a movie. That's number one. And make it in the summertime, by the way.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
okay.
that's when the summertime with no air conditioning.
Certainly in Los Angeles. Okay. Check.
Do you like to challenge yourself? Do you like to kind of accomplish one thing and go, okay, I did that. I want to set the bar higher.
I get restless very easily. And that's not to say that I get bored with projects. I think for me, I'm always sort of battling these inner demons of proving that I'm good enough or proving that I belong a certain place. I mean, again, I didn't come from a family with money. I earned my way into USC and I had to work hard to stay there because I was on scholarships and grants. Those could be taken away from me at any time.
Sure.
So it's sort of a discipline that I have given myself. If you ask any of my friends or my colleagues, one of the things that I'm known for is always having multiple balls in the air and being a very driven person. I thrive on being active and busy. I don't like to necessarily wait for things to happen for me. I like to try to be the driver of my own fate. Again, it's the stone soup analogy. The more that you put out into the world, the more that you will get back.
Were you thinking about what your life would look like when you were driving across country? I realized you were 18 and you were blasting Tori Amos.
Oh, absolutely. I thought my life was going to be, theater and, if I was lucky, film. My love started in theater and storytelling. I discovered that side of myself when I was in high school, and it's stuck with me. Narrative storytelling is something that I've just been. I knew that I wanted to do it, and I didn't know that the thing for me that would take off would be the writing. I had no idea I had these stories in me. I had no idea that Sleepy Toes would become what it was. I had no idea that I would be a children's book author. And I didn't know that the stories that were the closest to me would be the ones that would reach out into the world. And I think it's a bit of bravery to be able to tell those stories and open yourself up. But as a writer, that's what resonates with people. So if you can put a bit of yourself on the page, if you can be, brave and share that and let people see that, then I think that you're doing yourself and the world a service.
When you were attending USC, you said you had a 40-hour week job.
Oh yeah.
So how were you managing that? I'm just curious.
I didn't sleep. I learned time management skills. It's you'd asked earlier about do you write? Yeah, I write. I don't do it at the same time every day, but I do it every day a little bit, whether it's jotting down an idea or if it's fleshing out, a pitch or a log line or something. I do something every single day. So time management, I think, is a very important skill to have as a writer. It's a good professional skill to have too. You never want to be late to a meeting. You don't want to waste anybody's time. I feel like being aware of other people's needs as well can help serve your own.
If a friend were in your shoes, what advice would you give them?
Change careers. No, I'm kidding. I know this about myself. I can get discouraged, and sometimes it's very hard to see the forest through the trees. I hope I'm using that expression correctly.
Yeah, I know. I have to do the same thing. I'm like, wait, did I get it backwards?
Right. But I think, if it was a female friend, I think it would be to find your tribe. And I know that sounds a little cliche, but it does make a difference. You have to find your audience and you have to find your platform. And the one thing that I would tell any writer is to utilize every single experience that you have ever had and put it in your writing and put it in your work. I can't tell you the number of times that, my skills as a graphic designer have come in handy because I've done pitch decks and I haven't had the money to pay for anybody to design the pitch deck. So I've done it myself. Or I have had to develop characters. I learned ASL as a little girl and I've forgotten a lot of it, but I have, worked on projects or gotten meetings or something because of that particular skill set. So don't discount any experience that you've had in your life prior to you becoming a writer. That's what makes you interesting. That's what makes you unique. That's what makes you, that's what makes people want to talk to you. So don't discount any experiences that you've had and see if you can find a way to put that into your work.